Record. And now let me get to the presentation. Okay, and that means I can get started over here. Thanks, guys. All right. The biggest thing today, what I really want to talk about is what is the difference between a child and a teenager? One of the questions that I asked you last week was, now that Mari is smoking cigarettes, she's really proud of it. She says, I'm leaving childhood behind. And so many of you had said, no, that doesn't make you a child, or that doesn't make you an adult just because you're smoking. There's other things to it. And I think that's a really important point. So what makes, and I don't want to talk about an adult yet because Mari isn't an adult yet. She's a teenager now instead of a little girl like what we saw at the beginning of the book. So what is the difference between a child and a teen? Not just hormones. You can't, beyond biology, right? How do you know if someone is immature like a child as opposed to being a young adult? Not quite an adult, right? But a little bit more mature. So let's start just talking about being a child.
Do we write it down, or do we
Yes, yeah. If you're on Pear Deck, I want you to type out your responses. But you can talk too. I think that's the one thing I'm missing now that we're using Pear Deck is I miss the fact that like some of you used to just like speak as well and be a conversation. We can still converse since we're using it. So feel free to talk as well, but I do want you to share your answers.
what I think is like you have more decisions to make as a teenager, as opposed to a child, more freedom to do what you do, more responsibility to take care of what you're doing. Oh yeah.
Okay, I like that. Go ahead and write that down, Greg. I like that. Type that out.
When a child rebels, they do it in a really straight.
What do you mean, Rayan? What are you saying?
Like diagonal way. So like if Mari didn't like something that her mom was doing, she went and like secretly smoked a cigarette and like to symbolize her own rebellion.
So let's see if we can put that into a quality, a trait. What does that say about being a child? I want to start with just talking about being a child first. How would you describe a child? I like that Leela said innocent.
To me, like a child, they're still learning like a lot of like things still about the real world, as of like a teenager already has learned them.
So a teen's got it all figured out. By the time you're 16, you know what the world's all about and how things work.
Well, not everything, but quite a bit. Like we know how to like be more mature kind of deal. Other than like a kid, they're still like, like let's go play on the monkey. Well, no, wait, I can't say that because I still play on monkey bars. But
see what I mean? But that's just it. Like so, let's really try to hone in on those characteristics. And I'm okay with you using the book. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of the book, what kind of things do we hear Mari talking about? What is she more concerned about as a kid as opposed to being a teen? And how does she make sense of what her parents are talking about as a child compared to when she's a teenager? I'm seeing maturity all over the place, and you're right. This all comes down to maturity. A teen has more developed opinions. I like that. I like that a lot. But how do you know if your opinion's developed? What does that mean? Like you've heard more things, you've heard both sides, you can understand both sides.
Little kids are shaped by the people that are around them. They learn from who they mentor.
Greg, that's awesome. That is an awesome point. I want you to write that down. I want you to type that out. I think that's so true. And I think you can prove that with the book very well. When you're a child, you are shaped more by your parents' opinions, by the opinions of the adults that surround you. And how is that different when you're a teenager?
When you're a teenager, you have more freedom. You could deny others and believe what you want to believe. You have more freedom to believe in what you want instead of being shaped by those around you. You could choose what you want to believe in, to opposed to a little kid that doesn't really know much.
So that means that you might even disagree with your parents and you have opinions about things that are different than your parents? I think that's huge. So good. Okay, on the next slide, then what are the traits of a teenager that are different from a child? Go ahead and type your responses now, but you're also welcome to share those. Like I appreciate what Greg just said. You tend to develop more of your own opinions, but what shapes your opinions as a teenager? Or do they just fall out of the sky? Like do some of our opinions just kind of come to us on our own, or are there still other outside influences
Friends,
influence
TV
our appearance? Your peers, I agree with that.
music.
Peers do what? Jake, I like that. Can you type that out in a complete thought though? Peers do what? And the rest of you are welcome to respond as well. And you can keep talking. Greg, I appreciate that you're still verbally working out your thoughts. I think that's good.
Can you hear me when I use my mic? I'm having connection problems.
Yeah, Nadia, is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, go for it.
I was saying that when you're a teenager, you don't face your issues as directly as you do in a child. So you kind of rebel internally more than you do externally.
Now that's interesting. I appreciate that you're bringing up this idea of rebellion, but why would you say there's more rebellion internally than externally?
Well, when Mari was a kid and she didn't agree with her parents, she would go up to them and be like, no, I don't like that. But when she's a teenager, she doesn't agree with her parents, so she goes and secretly smokes a cigarette for her own personal rebellion.
I love that. So maybe a teen is going to be more reflective than a child, where instead of just vocalizing your thoughts immediately and almost like reactively, right? Like you're going to emotionally react, maybe you do more thinking to yourself before you speak your thoughts. I think that's a really interesting point. Peers can influence you to do things. Some are good and some are bad. It is harder to say no because you don't want to lose your friends. Oh man, the whole idea of peer pressure. I completely agree with that. What is it? Try to do something, maybe reflect on your own experiences, but there is a shift. There's a shift that happens at some point in elementary school. Maybe it's different for everybody. When before all you wanted was the approval of your teacher, the approval of your parents, the approval of your grandparents, you wanted that positive reinforcement, you wanted that praise, and then something shifts, and it's not about pleasing your parents anymore. It's about pleasing your friends. What is it? Why is it that our friends tend to be more of an influence on us when we're older as opposed to when we're younger? What do you think about that?
Your friends, you hang out with them more and you want to be accepted by them, so you try to keep them on your good side instead of making them mad.
I think that's a good point. We do end up spending more time with our peers than we do with our own families. If you think about how many hours a day you spend in a school building, yeah, you end up spending a lot more time with your peers than you do with your family. That's a good point. Why else?
Also because when we're teenagers, we're kind of more about oh, well, if we do what they do, we can be liked by them and everyone will think we're cool, that kind of deal. We want to blend in and for instance, if somebody's, for instance, smoking or something, it's oh, well, they're smoking, so maybe I should smoke too, because then they'll like me more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rand, what I like, I hear what you're saying about this desire for acceptance, but I also like that you pointed out that dialogue in our head goes, oh, they're doing what I do, or I like to do that too, right? That's something I want to try. And so I'm also hearing that we look for things we can identify with, some things that feel comfortable. And so when we do see that, then we want to be a part of that. Does that sound correct or right?
Yeah, a lot easier than how I was explaining it. Yeah, that's like a shorter way.
And you fall away from your parents. You really don't like look up to them, or some things happen and you really don't want to go to them because you're embarrassed to talk to them. So you stay away from them more.
So then maybe we do start to become a little bit afraid of what makes us different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so then you do become a little bit more embarrassed of your parents or embarrassed of your family, maybe, right? Depending on the situation. But I do think at some point, most of us can relate to being embarrassed or concerned about being embarrassed of our families. That's another good point. So let's look at this in the terms of Mari. How do we see her changing? So that's our next question. I like this conversation. This is good. The next part, wait, trying to get back to my slide over here. Good. Consider what changes Mari from a child to a teen. If we think about what Mari was like, and I like that, I think it was Nadia, either Nadia or Rayan had pointed out, right? Mari was, if she disagreed with her parents, she just said it, right? But we also see her imitating some things. I mean, think about the things that Mari did as a kid. Like, yay, we're going to play Revolution and we're going to stick hammer nails in between our fingers and go after a kid. Like, this was childhood play for her, right? Like, very, very different context. And then think about what Mari is doing as she gets older, right? So what influences these changes that we see in Mari as she gets older?
When Mari was a kid, she really wanted to be part of the revolution, and she really wanted to just be a part of like all of the like the hype that her parents were involved in. But as she got older, she started to want to detach from that hype and kind of detach from like the opinions of everyone around her and kind of form her own opinions and kind of seclude in the basement or go and like do different kinds of things like with her like older teenage friends instead of trying to play Revolution all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, when you bring that up, Nadia, and Jake, I want to get to what you're talking about because I think that's a good idea too. But what's interesting is when you point out those differences, I see one very powerful similarity, and in both, Mari's trying to imitate the adults, but in such different ways. For when she's a kid, it's much more playful. She's doing her own interpretation of it, right? Like the best that she can make sense of what she sees, and we see through her actions that what she sees, a lot of it is the yelling and the violence. It's not about the ideas. It's just, yeah, so here's how it's much more emotionally reactive, right? Yeah, here's what we do. But how is it different as she's older? Because I want to say I still see her trying to imitate what she sees adults doing, but what makes it different?
I feel like she really made the transition between having a really childlike perception to kind of maturing a little bit when she realized that the revolution wasn't all fun games, when she like saw the violence and saw revolution, and that's when she started denying the opinions and kind of rebelling emotionally against.
I agree with that. And that ties in what Jacob is saying too. Jake said, losing people makes you grow up faster because you've already seen the worst in life. I think after that, it's not pretend anymore. It's not hypothetical, right? And as a child, when it's just pretend, when it's just play, when it's just in theory, it is much more imaginative, and then we get to react imaginatively about it. But when it becomes real, then things change. You see the change in your parents. And I think if we look to, I'm looking on page 75, right? Like once the new regime took over and everything really changed for them, she saw her neighbors who used to wear mini skirts all of a sudden wearing full robes, right? Covering everything up except their eyes. And she and her parents now tell her, if anyone ever asks you what to do during the day, say you pray, understand? And then that became the competition, right? I pray 5 times a day. Oh, really? I pray 11 times. Sometimes I pray 12 times a day, right? Like, and that's what it became. But she's seeing that even the adults have to be somebody that they're not, or they have to change who they are. And I think things are different when you start to see the adults change, because we're used to, and we expect the adults in our life to be the grown-ups and to be that consistency. But when we start to see the adults around us change, that makes everything different for the kid as well. And I think that violence is a big part of that as well. So I think that brings in the next part. How do you see her sense of self change? Like how she sees herself, how she sees her purpose?
Everything that's going on. She still wanted to be a prophet, and she was really spiritual within herself, and she was really connected to God, and she got so God as a part of herself. But when she abandoned the idea of God and the idea of her being a prophet, she started kind of on herself and started hanging out with older crowds so that she would feel more accepted. She started getting posters and like fancy shoes so she would feel accepted, because she doesn't really fit as much as she had.
I heard parts of that. Sorry, Nadia.
Do you need me to repeat myself?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
When Mari was a kid, she wanted to be a prophet, and God as her friend and as a part of herself. But when she abandoned the idea of God, then she lost a part of herself, and she stopped feeling as confident in herself, and she started hanging out with older crowds and buying fancy punk posters and shoes and jackets so that she would feel more accepted, because she doesn't accept herself, because she isn't the same person anymore without her own spirituality and without God being there, because that was a part of her and she abandoned herself.
I think that's a huge point. I think that's so huge, and religion is such an interesting part of this book, but I think the change in her relationship to God is directly related to her change in her identity. I think that was the biggest shift in her bearings, big time. I love that. I think that's a really accurate analysis. That's awesome. What else? How else do we see? And I like that you brought in that punk part too, right? Like she starts experimenting with what she wants to look like and how she wants to dress with whatever without completely breaking the boundaries that are around her. And go back to the book, guys. I mean, I really want you using examples from the text, right? And that's where I love that you brought up the ideas of religion, how God stops visiting, right? Think about what happens after Anush is executed. I mean, that was huge too. And that's why I love that from the reading question last week, when we do that comparison between when Anush died and when her neighbor died, the little girl with the turquoise bracelet. So her name started with an N. What was her name? We see a huge, huge change there.
Was her name Nelda?
I want to say it was something like that. I can't find it in the book right now. I know I'm flipping through it. It was something like that. How did the death of her neighbor affect her differently than the death of Anush?
Well, Anush was her role model. He was her excuse to be cooler than Lali, because her family suffered more than Lali's family. He was kind of something to boast about. But Nelda was, or like, I don't know if it was Nelda, her neighbor was like a person that she interacted with on a regular basis. And it was different because she didn't just hear about it in the news. She walked over and she saw the wreckage, and she saw Nelda be like crushed under the house, and she saw the bracelet attached to her wrist. So it was a lot more real than some like fantasy, like uncle that was part of like all this great revolutionary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was like an actual person that was like close in her life.
Yeah, being her peer. Yeah, Neda or Neda, Neda. Yeah, that was her name. Totally. What other scenes from part one do you see a huge change in her? Before, being a martyr was cool, and by the end of part one, being a martyr isn't cool. That isn't something that she sees as motivating or inspiring. And what brings about that change? What brings about that change of, I don't want any more martyrs in my life. I don't want any more martyrs in my neighborhood. We don't need any more martyrs. Like, how does that come to be? I think that's a huge change from her being a child to being a teenager.
I think when she saw all the tombs, I think, what are they called? It's like the rows and rows of just pictures of
Nuptial
martyrs.
chambers. Yeah, they didn't call them coffins. They called them nuptial chambers.
Yeah, well, I think that just made her lose interest in the whole martyr thing. It made being a martyr less special and more of just like a ongoing problem.
Yeah, I like what Leela's saying. I think she was just tired of losing people, and I mean that's a really it's. I guess my fear would be, is that too simple? But I think it really is that simple. As before, it was like, yeah, when you're a martyr, you get to be this hero, so to speak. But that's like her. Oh, what's the other name of her other friend who lost her dad in the war? Right? It's like, okay, yeah, maybe he's a hero, but I'd much rather have my dad here than have this hero in the family. I'd much rather have Anush here with me, who understands me, who I can talk to and connect with, than have him be gone. And all of a sudden, all of these people are disappearing. And so we go back to what Jake is saying, losing people makes you grow up faster because you've already seen the worst in life. This culture tried to portray death as not the worst in life, like almost like death is the ultimate thing. That's the best thing that can happen to you, because then you have that key to heaven, right? And you can have paradise and you can have everything that you want. And she is changing from wanting to mirror the positivity in her environment and trying to mirror all those different attitudes that she sees around her, just developing her own opinion. No, I don't think death is the greatest thing here. I don't think this is what we want. I don't think this is good at all. And especially, right, we have that, it's a little grotesque. It could possibly be worse, where they have that quote, like, a martyr injects into the blood of society something. Where is that picture? Do you know what I'm talking about? How many of you guys have your books with you?
I don't got it.
Where? Oh, and then when the 18-year-old communist is caught and executed, that had a huge effect on her too. Page 115. The one image that struck me the most by its gory imagery was, to die a martyr is to inject blood into the veins of society. And that's when she says, when the 18-year-old Mandana, when the 18-year-old communist Mandana is caught and executed, that's where she said, this is not injecting anything into society. This isn't helping anybody. And I think that's when you see a huge, I think that's a part of that huge change that we see in her. So if we had to come up with a list of terms, how does her sense of self change? Think about how she sees herself. What could we say? I'm going to create a new slide. I'm going to do short text answer. So how does her sense of self change? Let's see if we can describe how Mari is different, how she sees herself differently as a teen than she did as a child. Think about the role she played and what the role she wanted to play in the revolution. Think about the protests. Think about the people that inspired her, what she thought was cool and what she thought wasn't. The beginning of the book, did we see her participating in protests? Yes or no? Yeah, she wanted to be in those protests. Do we see her participating in protests when she's older? Not when she's older. And I like what Leela's pointing out. As a child, she wanted to participate in the revolution and really be a part of that change. And as she grew, I think she got tired of it all and just wanted to be at peace. And some of you pointed that out in your reading questions last week when she discovered that there was a chance for the Iranian government and Iraqi government to call a truce, and they chose not to. That had a huge impact on her. And I think that's when at least for me, that's when I saw her more about peace, is that there was a chance to end it and her government chose not to. And all of a sudden the government wasn't something, even the forces weren't something worth fighting for. It was just about being over it. Here's where I would, and Ryan, I appreciate what you're saying. Here's what I wanted to, I kind of want to back away from when she says she didn't care about it as a teen. I think she had some really strong feelings about the changes happening. You just don't see so much public demonstration about it. Instead, how do we see her acting out and rebelling against the changes in her culture as a teenager instead of as a kid?
I think probably she seems to, I guess she does still care in a little bit, but she doesn't care as much as a kid. I forget who said it, but the one person who said that with it as a teen, she was more kind of calm and just kind of didn't want to be a part of it. She just wants peace, kind of.
Leela, yeah, she wants peace. It's true. Think about why is she sent to Austria? Why does her family send her to Europe?
I haven't gotten to that part in the book, so that's why I'm kind of guessing.
Oh, that's not good. Yeah, for those of you who have finished part 1, why is she being sent to Europe?
Because she was a danger to herself for how outspoken she was.
Big time. She decked a teacher. she hit her teacher, who actually I think might have even been the principal of the school. And she can't hide her feelings. She can't keep her mouth shut. And the family is seeing what's happening even to young girls who, not just the men, right? Because men and women are treated very, very different in this society. Even the young girls are being taken to prison, tortured, and murdered for trying to fight against the regime. And her parents have a lot of concerns because she's losing control of herself. As a kid, it was almost game like. Remember when she went with her nanny, when she went with the babysitter to go to that protest for equal rights of all parts of society, right? For her, it's yeah, this is awesome. We're just going to shout and march and all of that. And her mom freaks out because is it only just about shouting and marching and chanting? Is that all it's about? Not even a little bit. I mean, people were dying. People were being murdered and trampled and beaten in the streets, right? And so this little girl doesn't even understand the half of what she's trying to participate in. Now that she's older, Mari does know, but she can't control herself. She can't control her physical reactions. She can't control her emotional reactions because she has so much anger and so much resentment. And that's when her family decides at 14 years old, you are safer living on your own with strangers in a completely different continent than you are here. That's huge. And some major changes happen for her then. You want to talk about growing up quick? That'll do it. So part 2 is going to give us a very, very, very different perspective on this growing up process and how even as she moves from teen to adult, all those changes that take place. But that's why I think it's so worthwhile to reflect on how has she changed as from a child to a teenager? How has she made that shift? I think that those stepping stones are huge. And so that's why I want you thinking about some of those things now. Think about the people who have influenced her and how they've influenced her. Think about what events have changed her, or even how she handles problems differently as a teenager than as she did as a kid, and how she handles conflict, how she handles her relationships differently as a teenager than she did as a kid. All of those are going to be very helpful for you by the time we get to the end of the book, because we're going to go through that same process when we get to the end of part 2, which is going to be in about another 3 weeks. So we've got 3 more weeks left with this book. What questions do you guys have about the text or about what's going on in the book? Does silence mean nothing? No questions? Okay. For those of you on Pear Deck, I am going to ask one more question. I just want to get a feel. I'm going to do the thumbs up and thumbs down. I want you to drag the dot to thumbs up if you're caught up with the reading. Thumbs down if you're not. That's why. And Nadia, you're caught up. Or no? Are you caught up or not?
I've done everything that was due like last week. I haven't started this week's assignments yet.
Yeah. No, then you're okay. Yeah, that means you finished part 1. Salam, how about you? Where are you at in the book?
I'm almost caught up.
Almost. So are you like done with 2/3 of part 1?
Yeah, around there.
So that would explain why some of our answers were vague. Okay. Before you move into this week, you have to finish part 1. So please make that a priority. Also, please keep checking your grades, because I am, I keep searching and surfing for zeros and missing work. If I miss something, please let me know. Okay, so please keep turning in as many assignments as you can, just so that you remember I am closing folders 1 through 5 on Monday, which means everything before Persepolis is frozen. It's done. So if you have any zeros in those folders, they're permanent. They stay. But I will be accepting late work before that. Any questions? Cool. Okay, keep reading. Message me if you need help or have questions, and please keep watching the gradebook to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week, guys.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a lovely